Hey guys, just here to review some of the stuff that happened in 2010 in MMA. This was a fantastic year for MMA, probably one of the best years, and definitely the best year since I've started taking an interest in it. And a year with a lot of big shifts and changes. What were the biggest stories of this year? Well, I'd say there were probably 3 or 4 big stories. The biggest by far was the news of the WEC-UFC merger. This is something that created the biggest ripples and will have the most repercussions, and it's big for a couple reasons. One, the UFC now has every major weight class in mixed martial arts with the exception of a flyweight 125-pound division, and they're still lacking any sort of women's MMA. However, they probably are going to add a flyweight division. It might even happen by the end of next year. So with that, they're really going to seal the deal, and there's no other major promotion that has all 7 weight classes. So that's big. And the other thing is, because they've absorbed lightweight, featherweight, and bantamweight divisions of the WEC, it's no secret that the lighter weight classes usually have the best fights. Those guys are going to start stealing all the Fight of the Night bonuses, I think, and it's just going to make the fights in the UFC better. And the other big thing is they've absorbed really what was the best fighting promotion that was not the UFC, in a lot of people's opinions, including mine. So, bad for MMA, good for the UFC. And that leads to the second biggest thing that happened in 2010, which was we saw the UFC continue to rise, continue to get better in the terms of its business gain stronger, its reach growing, its fighter roster increasing, and almost all of its competitors had bad years in 2010. The UFC's largest competitor is, of course, Strikeforce, and they really overall had a bad year. They came off a good year in 2009, ending with a really successful network television debut of Fedor Emelianenko. That was around Thanksgiving. And then they signed Dan Henderson, who was at that time one of the top middleweights in the world. And coming off those 2 events, people thought that 2010 was really going to be a breakout year for Strikeforce. And it turned out that they've really taken a few steps back. Strikeforce has a couple of problems. The first is the people that Strikeforce is trying to put up as its marquee fighters are either 2 things. One, they're all former UFC fighters, which doesn't help because they're not building their own people from scratch. And 2, the fighters they're trying to promote the most are losing. Dan Henderson lost. Fedor lost. The only people winning in their organization is Alistair Overeem, who only fought once, and Nick Diaz. So they're having a lot of trouble. The other big thing with them is they can't control their fighters. They have a very different business strategy than Ultimate Fighting Championship and Zuffa. With Zuffa, the brand comes before the fighters. It's all about the UFC. It's less about its individual fighters. With Strikeforce, it's the other way around, and because of that, they have a heavyweight champion who's defending his title pretty much once every 3 years, which is unheard of in any serious MMA promotion. Their biggest, most marketable fighter is Fedor Emelianenko, and because his management is so powerful, they've only been able to get him to fight 1 time this entire year. It wasn't even a major fight, it was not heavily promoted, and he lost, which was a disaster. It was his first loss in 10 years, and a big blow for Strikeforce. Dan Henderson lost, and then the guy that beat Dan Henderson, which is a fighter that they've kind of built up from scratch, was Jake Shields, who immediately left the promotion and went to fight for the UFC, and he's going to be fighting for the title next. So Strikeforce has taken a big step back. And so have the other promotions. WEC is gone. Japanese MMA is on the verge of complete and total extinction because the parent company that owns the K1 Kickboxing Championship, that owns the Dream Fightings, and that owns Sengoku is in huge financial trouble, and they're already starting to lose a lot of their fighters. Kid Yamamoto just went to the lightweight division in the UFC, so he's going to be fighting starting next year for Zuffa. And Japanese MMA, ever since Pride left, has really been in a slow decline. The only other company that I think poses a serious threat to Zuffa is the Bellator Fighting Championships, which I'll talk about later. They signed a new deal with MTV2. They're probably going to put on around 32, 33 fights or events, I think they said, in the next year. And they have a different format than Strikeforce, so I think they're going to do fairly well. But Lorenzo Fertitta said it best. MMA is on the fall, but the UFC is on the rise, and that's really true. It's the only organization that over the long term is proving to be successful. Other big news this year, this really was a year of upsets. There were more upsets this year, and near upsets if you think about the Chael Sonnen and Anderson Silva, which I consider kind of an upset even though Anderson Silva pulled it off. There were more of those this year than I can remember. Jake Shields beating Dan Henderson. Frankie Edgar beating BJ Penn twice was incredible to me. Fedor getting beaten by someone who everyone before his victory over Fedor, people thought of Fabricio Verdum as basically a UFC dropout. Someone that couldn't make weight, came into a fight out of shape, and then got stomped by, I think it was Gabriel Gonzaga. So his upset of Fedor was incredible. There was the Chael Sonnen fight. Really the only two champions that managed to stay atop the pack were George St. Pierre, who was never even threatened once in 2010, and Anderson Silva. Brock Lesnar got beaten by Cain Velasquez. A lot of people picked Lesnar as the favorite. I thought all along Cain was going to win the fight, and I'm not just saying that, I really did, but he was the underdog in that. So it really proves why MMA is, in my opinion, the best and the most entertaining sport, because in baseball, you know, if it's the 9th inning and you're down 10-1, you're probably going to lose 99% of the time. The same in football. But in MMA, no matter how bad you're losing, you always have that chance to come back, and I think that's what makes the sport incredible. Just getting on to some predictions for next year. I think next year is going to be another fantastic year in MMA. Couple predictions. One is a long shot, but I really do think it's going to happen. I think they're finally going to do the Anderson Silva-George St. Pierre fight at the end of next year. And that really all hinges on Yushin Okami, whether they get him to take the title fight or they persuade him to drop out or he gets injured or something like that. He's had his title shot coming for a while. He was supposed to have it, I think, in 08 or 07, and it got canceled on him. So I think they won't be inclined to take it from him, but if he is able to get out of that fight, then I think they're finally going to do GSP and Silva. Other prediction, I really think the UFC is going to get a network TV deal by the end of next year. I think the only reason they chose to absorb the WEC when they did was because they finally had that lined up, and they have to get some sort of a network TV deal or some way to get more fights on television, because as of now, they have more fighters than they can give time. They can't do any more pay-per-views next year. They're pretty much maxed out on those. Spike TV is only going to let them do so many free events. And Versus, even though they're going to air 4 fights on Versus, it's not a long-term viable option for them. The problem with Versus is you can't advertise Versus fights on Spike, and you can't advertise Spike fights on Versus because they're competing cable companies. So there's only so long that the UFC can continue to put on events on Versus, but then pretend they're not happening on Spike TV and the other way around. So they're going to need to deal with Fox, with CBS, with ABC, and I think they're finally going to get it. My other prediction is Strikeforce is going to continue to fall apart. I think it's poorly run. I think they have a bad business strategy. Their whole strategy is basically try to be as much like the UFC as possible, and they can't do that. So I think that by the end of next year, Bellator is actually going to be the most significant MMA organization that's not the UFC. Bellator is really continues to impress me. I think their CEO, Bjorn Rebli, is his head's in the right spot. I think he's a good businessman, and he's also trying to be distinctly different from the UFC. Their organization has a different format. They do a tournament format. They got to deal with MTV2, which is probably, I don't think, the best partner, but we'll see what happens. They are going to air consistent live fights, which I'm really looking forward to because I wasn't able to see Bellator before. I had to watch a lot of it on the internet. And also, I think they're going to have some interesting fighters. They don't have the big names that the UFC has, but in their tournament format, that's almost kind of better because anyone can win. And I think the way they do their fights is actually a little bit more fair to the fighters than the way the UFC does it. Plus, they have some great fighters. Eddie Alvarez is the best lightweight that no one really watches. I mean, he's a fantastic lightweight. I think he could even give someone like Frankie Edgar or Anthony Pettis a run for their money. And lastly, looking at 2010, just a couple of picks for what I thought were some of the biggest events of the year. Keep in mind that I don't see all the MMA fights, I don't follow all the organizations, so this is going to be a little bit limited than if I was like a real journalist that was going to see all these things. In 2010, the fight of the year, personally, actually just happened last week, Anthony Pettis versus Ben Henderson. I think that was one of the best fights. I've never really seen a title fight that was all tied up at the beginning of the 5th round in the biggest fight of the year, a championship fight, and the last ever fight in the organization, and then to end the way it did with Anthony Pettis and that head kick was just amazing. I think submission of the year, I gotta say it's a tie between Fabricio Verdum submitting Fedor, because that was a historically significant submission, first time Fedor has legitimately lost in over a decade, and it's got to tie with Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen. You know, Anderson Silva to really never ever get beat and dominated like that, and then pull it out in the last half of the last round of a championship fight, a triangle choke like that was really incredible. Knockout of the night, that is really hard. Eddie Wineland's KO slam last week was an incredible knockout, and maybe could have been the best knockout of 2010. I also thought that Carlos Condit's knockout of Dan Hardy was really great, just because they were both literally punch each other right at the same time, and it came down to whose chin was better, and surprisingly Carlos Condit's chin was better, and he knocked out Dan Hardy, something that's never been done before. Another thing was that I was able to go to WC 48 this year, Aldo versus Faber, and I saw the Leonard Garcia versus the Korean Zombie fight, and that was one of the best fights of the year, maybe the best fight of the year, and to see it live was a really special experience for me. And also, I've never heard anything as loud as when Aldo Faber came out in his hometown of Sacramento, so that was something that was fun for me to watch. So that's it. I'm going to be doing, I think, a lot more of these in next year, 2011, and once my website's up and running, I'll be able to share it with you guys so you can check it out. Until then, everyone have a safe holidays, and we'll meet back here when Edgar fights Gray Maynard to determine the UFC lightweight champion on New Year's Eve. Okay guys, thanks.